Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. The topic is education in Pennsylvania. Join our discussion by calling us at 1-877-PA6-5001 or text us at 717-219-4001. We'll also take your questions from PCN's Facebook page submitted earlier today. Our guests today are Ann Clark, CEO of the Pennsylvania Coalition of Public Charter Schools, and Donna Cooper, Executive Director of Children First PA. Donna, you get us started. What does the governor's new budget have in store for funding education in general?
Well, look, the governor's budget takes another big step forward in trying to resolve the educational inequity in Pennsylvania. He proposed more than $500 million that would go out to school districts in the fair funding formula. That funding benefits traditional public schools and charter schools. And so it's a big step forward. There's still much more to be done. And as you know, the budget process isn't quite over yet. There's still the hanging issues of whether extra funding is going to be sent to the lowest income school districts in the state. That there's $100 million hanging in the balance. And at the same time, there's the debate over whether funds should be directed for vouchers and education improvement tax credits. So we're not quite done the budget, but we started at a really good place.
Ann, how do you see the governor's new budget proposal?
Well, anytime that we see an increase in funding for our schools is a positive day in Pennsylvania. Education has changed drastically over the last 5 years, primarily because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We see students who have greater needs academically, social-emotionally, behaviorally. We have a shortage of teachers. Partially that is because of what they're paid, but in addition to that, it's just a hard place to be in the classroom in Pennsylvania.
Donna, the governor says about his new budget that it represents the largest increase in basic education funding ever. Are there any limitations as to how that money can be spent?
Actually, school districts can use those funds to hire new teachers, increase teacher salaries, reduce class size, put full day kindergarten on the table. It's highly flexible funds. In fact, this budget proposal, while extremely ambitious, in general, because the governor also increased funds for higher ed, it's a real historic marker. But in terms of the basic ed funding for our public schools, the former governor did surpass him. So we have to be a little bit more ambitious if we want to be able to say it's the most ever. But the question isn't about the most. The question is, are we at the right mark? And we're not there yet. And it's not a race to say I did the most. It's a race to say I met the court challenge and what the court found, and I put enough resources on the table to meet the needs of our kids. And we are billions of dollars away from that.
And can you pick up on what Donna was talking about? She says it's more than the sum of money, but how, of course, that money is spent.
Absolutely. Me and Donna agree on that 100%. When we look at equity, it's in everything in the education. It's not just in the money alone, but it's in the resources. It's in our connection between K-12 to higher education. It's in our training that we're giving our teachers, what we're offering our students. Pennsylvania really needs to be at the cutting edge of education. And in many cases, we're funding at a higher level than a lot of states in the United States, and yet we're not necessarily as innovative as other states, and I believe that this has a direct impact on our economics. And last year we lost 64,000 residents in Pennsylvania to other states. We have to make Pennsylvania a place that you want to live, learn, work.
Ann, you said Pennsylvania is not as innovative as other states. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes.
And then we'll get to you, Donna. I heard you.
Sure.
Absolutely. One of the things that the coalition is doing right now is we are mapping in the entire United States what schools are being offered, what parents are desiring, both in clubs, in and out of the schools, what types of schools should be placed where in Pennsylvania to really be innovative. And so we're looking at California, New Mexico, Las Vegas. In addition to that, I'm working with both gentlemen in Africa and in Ireland to look at education across the world.
And what are they doing out in the western United States that we should be doing?
One of the things that they're really looking at is what they're offering children every day and really having that catalog of offerings. And so a child could say, be here, and our studio right this second and yet be learning anything from across the country. And so I think that we need to be more flexible and allow our cyber schools, because they have a lot of these offerings, to offer them to our traditional schools, right? Let's not necessarily work harder. Let's just work smarter with what we have.
Go ahead, Donna.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things people often hear is that Pennsylvania's schools on general have resources that put them in the top tier of all schools in the country. And that's true when you compare, the average of Pennsylvania schools with all the resources they have. But that doesn't explain the disparity. We have some of the greatest gaps, if not the greatest, between the wealthiest schools and the poorest schools in the state. We have that disparity is the greatest in Pennsylvania. And one of the reasons is because we're over-reliant on property taxes. And nobody really likes property taxes, and I get it. I pay it, you pay it, we all pay it. And it does support our schools. But in a community where the property value is weak, you can't generate enough to fund your schools. And that's where state funding comes in. And Pennsylvania, on a per student level, is near the bottom of all the states in terms of how much it's putting on the table to support its kids. And that's very different from when I went to school, and maybe when a lot of your viewers went to school. The state was funding schools at 50% of the cost. Back when I graduated, and I'm not going to say when, but believe me, it was a long time ago, in the heyday of public education in Pennsylvania. And over that time, certainly since 1991, state share of funding for schools has declined dramatically, and we're now down around 38% of funds coming from the state. So some schools have a lot of opportunity, and some schools, to Ann's point, with tons of virtual education options, with lots of technology, and some schools have textbooks that are 15 years old because of that disparity. And I think when you ask that question about innovation, I look at the states where the performance of students is the highest, Massachusetts and Maryland. And what they have is robust state resources and high expectations, wherein they want to reduce class size, the proven ingredient of boosting achievement for kids in elementary school. They have very high standards for what it takes to be a teacher, and they pay for teachers to have a year of induction so that they can learn how to be great teachers from the great teachers in their schools. And they do many other things that really ensure that their kids are at the top of the pack in America. And so we have states very close to us on the East Coast we can learn from, but the bottom line is they're not struggling financially between the rich and the poor districts. And where our academic achievement challenges are greatest are in rural PA and urban PA, both communities with limited resources, and we see much greater outcomes in just those neighbors of Massachusetts and Maryland, and we can replicate what they're doing.
Viewers, we'd like you to participate in this discussion we're having, and you can do that by calling 1-877-PA6-5001, or you can text us at 717-219-4001. And ladies, we have a text question here from our viewers, and I'm going to read it to you the best I can. The state will need a lot of new money to adequately, they have in quotation marks, fund our public schools. Why not change to a graduated state income tax like the feds use? Ann, you go first.
Well, I definitely believe that we're going to need to look at everything, including our property taxes and our state taxes and what is given to our schools. I mean, I came from the 95th district, and we have one of the highest funded schools in that area, and one of the lowest. That was part of the court case. There is a huge disparity, and one of the reasons we have 500 districts. I mean, when I speak to people across the nation, most of our states do not have 500 authorizing districts. And so every district does have less because there are districts who have quite a bit more. But are they really going to be willing to give up their property taxes, their high per pupil allotment, to subsidize the lower school? Probably not. So this is really a whole entire systems change.
Go ahead, Donna.
Well, I think Ann's right. There are a few states where they do take all the money collected, put it in a pot, and then redistribute it. Vermont being, and Michigan being examples of that, where a Republican governor and a Democratic governor forced those changes. And they did close the disparity gap, but it was highly painful. And there are different states than Pennsylvania. I mean, that could happen here, but I don't think it's the going solution. I think at the end of the day, look, we have one of the lowest personal income tax rates in the country, 3.07%. And with very limited pain on every taxpayer, we could close our school funding gap. So rather than a massive revolution between whether my taxes here go to educate a kid somewhere else, which, maybe people want to have that conversation, with limited pain to households, we can increase Pennsylvania's personal income tax, still be lower than nearly every state in the country, and solve our school funding crisis. Look, we need several $billion. Like, it's probably going to be somewhere between $5 and $6 billion based on the evidence presented in the court case. And that sounds like a lot. But even if the state were to pony up that amount of money, we would be nowhere near the top of states at a per student level investing in our students. And it's time we do it, because the global economy demands massive changes. We need to make those changes happen if we want to have more of our high school graduates successfully stay here and work and bring employers to Pennsylvania. Ann pointed it out at the top of the show. People are moving out of the state. They're going where there's opportunity for them and their families.
A question for you, Ann. We'd all like to see improvements in the classroom, of course, but are there important areas that are invisible to the public that we should consider now that are part of the governor's budget?
Well, I don't know necessarily about the budget itself, but one thing that we're focused on is high quality standards for all of our charter schools. In the last 6 months, I've been able to certify 3 charter schools as high quality. We adopted 40 national standards that looks at areas of governance, operation, financial, academics. The one thing I would like to focus on is the academic piece. Nowhere in there does it have state testing. What it talks about is curriculum, teacher training, attendance for students, right? The holistic approach to it. So I think that we have so many of the right pieces in Pennsylvania, but we need to really cultivate that all together. I do think many times our education system is in a poverty mindset, meaning like I don't know if I'm going to get more, so let me hold on to this little bit that I have, versus they're all Pennsylvania children, right? Regardless if they're in York or Harrisburg or Allentown or Lancaster, right? What are they? All Pennsylvania children. And I think that if we could just shift our thinking a little bit that way, instead of saying, this 500 districts, let's hold on to our little piece, but what is best for the children of Pennsylvania? And then that, of course, equates to what? Better adults, more jobs, more money, less taxes for all of us, more people moving in versus more people moving out.
Donna, what do you think as far as improvements we could make that might not be so obvious, but they're important?
Sure. Look, there is a bill moving in the legislature to do some of the things that Ann talked about, to really think about how do we evaluate charter schools? How do we make sure that they are improving their financial conditions? Pennsylvania became a mockery around the country when a couple of years ago, John Oliver did a special on Pennsylvania's charter law, calling us the Wild West of the charter environment. And we recently at Children First did a report on charters, and there are some terrific charters. We are not anti-charter. We are pro any kind of public school that is delivering for our kids. But like public schools, many charters are struggling with performance. And I'm really happy to hear Ann talking about that, because we have to have very rigorous standards for charters and traditional public schools with respect to academic achievement. And one thing people often think is, oh, if I go to a charter school, my kid's automatically going to get better academic supports. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen in a majority of our charter schools. By the way, in a majority of our public schools, where children of poverty and children of color are attending. And so if you look at those charters and those publics, they are struggling. Our view of why they're struggling, because they have too few resources to reduce class sizes, offer full day kindergarten, have the best trained teachers, compete for the best. Right now, where are the best teachers going? They're being hired at the highest dollar at the highest school districts. That's basic economics 101. We need our charters and our public schools that are educating kids who have the greatest challenges to have the best teachers. And so until we get to this core issue of solving for school funding, we're going to continue to have a lot of conflict between charters and public schools that is an unnecessary fight because they both suffer the same structural challenges.
Okay, Donna, and ladies, thank you very much. We have our first phone call here on Capitol Preview, and it's from Janice in McKeesport. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I'm a little nervous.
Take your time.
I was kind of like challenging the facts that the textbooks sometimes there's such a wealth of information in an old book, and it's like my motto is like something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue, and it's kind of like the dedication of the people in Pennsylvania, can be challenged by certain events that the school, can sponsor, that we can, the resources of the families in that area, can be tapped into. And, who doesn't love the fact that, hey, I'm being picked, and I'm going to try my best to be what these children need. My family's lived in the area for such a long time. Maybe it's Lancaster County. They've been pipping us with the historical value of that county alone. And
pardon me, Janice, your time is limited. Try to ask your question, please.
Okay. I wanted to know, what can we do to challenge the families in these areas?
Can I take that? I love that question. I think that's one of the most important questions that we can all ask ourselves is, what can we be doing to help our local school? And it doesn't matter if it's our traditional public school or our charter school, right? Here's lots of things you can do. I mean, one of the things that I did for my own school before I took this position was to connect to the community. That could be bringing tissues over. There was a gentleman who used to bring a pair of gloves a month, but for him and for us, it was a big deal to get that pair of gloves. And so I would, challenge all of us in Pennsylvania. They're all of our schools. And the best thing you can do is to show up, bring a box of tissue, and the principal's going to really appreciate it, or water, or whatever else you can think of.
I like that hands-on approach, Donna. What do you think?
Well, I think, Janice raises a really good point. We all need to be involved in our schools and volunteer and, organize school festivals and organize things that bring spirit and show kids we care about education and we care about them. I raised the textbook issue because I remember talking to students in Norristown, Pennsylvania, which is a pretty hard-hit, old, small industrial city in Montgomery County over here on the eastern part of the state. Not too different from McKeesport, Janice, but definitely, not as old as McKeesport in terms of industry. But anyhow, the students said to me, my textbook says that George Bush, first George Bush, is president. And it was when Barack Obama was president. And that student felt, we ought to have textbooks that are more recent, that really, our school ought to have enough money and enough resources so that I'm reading books about American history that don't miss the last 16 years or the last 20 years. Now, sure, a teacher can innovate, but in Pennsylvania, the disparity between schools really does limit what some kids are learning. I think about science mostly, right? So out where Janice lives, which is near Carnegie Mellon, kids are learning about artificial intelligence and coding in some of the best school districts out there. And kids that are in Wilkinsburg and Penn Hills, they're not getting those opportunities. What we're trying to say is that we should have state-of-the-art curricula in every school district. And of course, we need parents and community members to make a contribution, come in and tell the town history firsthand, and also find ways to help kids who need extra help by tutoring and resources. But we shouldn't see education as being the quality of education being subjected to the charitable contributions only. It is the role of the government to educate its people.
Capitol Preview will be taking your questions for roughly the next 30 minutes, folks. So call 1-877-PA65001, or you can text us at 717-219-4001. In August, the school voucher debate flared up again in Harrisburg. But let's start at the very beginning and tell me in the most objective terms possible, what is a school voucher?
A school voucher is the pure pupil allotment that's given to every child in Pennsylvania. It's decided by the home district, the authorizing district. That child can take the voucher and go to school wherever they would choose.
Mm-hmm. And those schools, Donna, are often, they can be private schools, religious schools. Can you expand on what Ann just told us?
Yeah, I mean, the going proposal in Pennsylvania is a financial cap somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 for some kids and a little bit higher for special ed kids that a parent could use to spend at a private or religious school. So the proposal in Pennsylvania isn't to take a voucher and be able to go anywhere. Mm-hmm. The proposal in Pennsylvania that has been advanced by the Senate leadership is specifically to be a ticket in partially for a private or religious school, even though the voucher doesn't hit the mark on their tuition level. If a private school were to accept a voucher, they would have to, or a religious school, they would have to permit the child to come in at the cap that the state sets.
Now, Ann, as far as you're concerned, why do Pennsylvania families need this alternative to traditional public schools?
Well, personally, I believe in school choice. The coalition believes, of course, in our charter schools, and that's what I'm here to advocate for. But I believe that parents have the right to determine what is most appropriate education for their child. And all of us are paying taxes. So let's say you're paying for your child to go to a private school. No one stops you from paying taxes. You still have to pay taxes. You're still paying into the educational system, both within your community and also within the state. Where the vouchers would go would be local community schools, right? The money would still be staying in the community. They would be paying salaries of people in the community. So personally, I believe that the dollars do follow the child, should follow the child, regardless of where they go. And I think there's been other states who've proven that this is the best policy for children. We support charter schools, the coalition, and some people feel that it does take away from our charter schools, that it could take away from our charter schools that are public schools. The National Alliance believes that vouchers should not be given to private schools. So that's one of the organizations that we work with. So personally, I feel one way, but professionally, I feel a different way.
How about you, Donna? Do you have kind of a split personality on that issue?
Less so. I mean, here's how I think the approach, if you were going to take a purely every parent has a right to a choice, then you have to do two things. One, you have to create the conditions where there's reasonable choice, i.e. you can't have an underfunded public school system and a very wealthy private school system and then wonder what parents are going to choose. Obviously, if every child could go to a beautiful private school that is in a wonderful gated setting or in an old mansion and have small class sizes compared to going to a outdated or crumbling public school, what are you going to choose with a class of 32 kids? So if we really want choice, we'd have to, first of all, in my mind, create the conditions where we have a level playing field so that parents don't have to make decisions to take their kids 2 hours away to a private school because it looks and feels and perhaps even is better because their public school is in such terrible condition because, as the state lawsuit showed, the Commonwealth is failing its constitutional obligation to educate our kids. But second of all, if we are going to embark on giving private schools vouchers, then we need to hold them accountable just like we hold charter schools accountable and public schools accountable. Kids should have to take the state assessments so we know if they're doing better. In the states where there are vouchers, kids of color and kids who are low income who have gone to private schools fail miserably. The data is very discouraging, and that is because the disparities in the environment they come from, and sometimes because the experiences that the children have are not able to be addressed in the private schools. But let's go on. If the private school sector and the religious school sector said, oh yeah, we're going to take the PSSAs, now we would know whether, in fact, the private schools would be working for our kids. In addition, the proposal on the table does not give Ann the choice to send her kid to a private school. The proposal on the table targets the 15% lowest performing schools in the state, and it says those kids would be given vouchers to go somewhere else. Now, where they're going to go in those communities may be no better. But if Ann's view is one that is the prevailing view that, quote, parents want this, then it should be available in 500 school districts across the state. In addition, we have the challenge in many private schools and religious schools of schools wanting to make sure kids share their religious values. Evangelical schools, Jewish schools, Catholic schools have religious classes. And so we have to ask ourselves, do we think that that is something that is fair for every kid that gets a voucher? Are parents comfortable with that? That's another issue. And then finally, right now in the private school sector and the religious school sector, they don't need to take kids with disabilities, and they don't need to address the needs of kids who have English as a different language, as a second language. So if we're going to create a voucher system, we're going to have to hold those schools accountable for equal protection under the law, which they're currently exempt from, and from the Individuals for Disabilities Act, and make sure that the civil rights of our students are protected. So we have a lot of conditions that would have to change so that parents would actually get choice and know if choice was working.
So, Ann, it sounds like the lowest performing schools would be eligible for vouchers.
That's exactly right, the bottom 15%. I want to take on the PSSAs for just a minute in this conversation. Right now, 1,500 of our public schools are below the state average. So all of these things that we make it reasons why this won't work or that won't work are the reasons why we are stuck in this fair funding court battle. All of these things are true, and yet all of they need to be changed. Right now, in that bottom 15%, when I looked at it, there's nearly 500 traditional public schools there. There are 55 charter schools, but I actually went to see the lowest performing charter school because I wanted to find out, why are you the last one on the list? When I went there, the charter school had been created by 2 districts. That's who created the charter school. And they did that in order to send their children who were failing academically, socially, emotionally, behaviorally to that charter school to increase their graduation rate and their academics. So I have to be really honest with you. After spending 6 months on a deep dive on our building scores and PSSAs, we as a public have no idea what goes into that building score, but it is skewed to make certain schools end up in the very bottom and some schools end up in the very top. The majority of Pennsylvania schools sit right in the average area, saying that their performance is about average, around 50% reading proficiency, 50% math proficiency, and their attendance rates are around 85%. So I think the majority of our Pennsylvania schools are doing well, but I do think that, yes, it is easier to perform when you have more money, and it is harder, but that's the whole reason that charter schools came about 26 years ago, is they are in urban areas to give parents choice. And I really don't like when we ever say that parents shouldn't have the choice. They should always have the choice. As long as they're paying the taxes, they should always have the choice.
All right, ladies, thank you very much. More on the subject of school vouchers after I give you a break. Just for a minute, because we're going to take a look at PCN's programming schedule. PCN will air the Capitol All-Stars softball doubleheader game this week. The annual event is a chance for lawmakers to put aside their differences and have fun together. That's tomorrow, live at 5 p.m. You can watch it on PCN Cable TV or stream it for free on PCN Select. A new On the Issues airs Wednesday at 6 p.m. Representative Jim Gregory joins us to discuss citizen involvement in sexual predator sting operations. Now you can watch our public affairs coverage for free on the internet. Go to PCNTV.com and our streaming service at PCN Select. And please find a moment to thank your local cable company for PCN. They carry our network on their channel lineup as a public service. And remember, PCN receives no state or federal tax dollars. Ann, I'm going to give the floor back to you because you pointed out that the voucher movement started 26 years ago, and I was thinking about the history there. What gave momentum to the voucher idea in the first place?
Well, charter schools began 26 years ago, and it really was born out of...
Oh, sorry, I thought you said the voucher idea.
Yeah, no. Well, it probably was part of that, too, like how do you give choice to children?
Yeah.
But the charter schools came about because the urban areas were performing at such a low level that it was determined that the only thing that would change is a brand new school. one of the school that I worked for was the first conversion school in Pennsylvania, public school taken over by a charter school. 50% of the parents had to agree that the achievement was so low, and 50% of the staff. The reading proficiency was 8%, math was 6%. That went on for nearly 20 years. And so that's what we're really looking at in our urban areas is reading and math proficiency below 10%. And a lot of disparity there for lots of reasons. But in our charter schools, the three things we always see is safety. That's always a priority. It doesn't matter if the school's in an urban or a rural area. Number two is relationships, very deeply rooted relationships with both the child and the family. And number three is student leadership. Those three things are present. I've been to approximately 80 of our 183 charter schools in person. And those three elements are true. And it doesn't matter if it's in the most rural area of Bear Creek or if it's the most urban area of Philadelphia.
Donna, I put this question to you because I think you touched on this a few minutes ago. I'm thinking about special education services for students who can get student vouchers. Just what's in the current plan that can help these kids get the services they need?
Yeah, I think, there are a couple of private schools that in fact specialize in giving kids with autism a special curricular approach that they may need to be more successful. But by and large, the private school sector and the religious school sector counsels out kids with disabilities, certainly severe physical disabilities, other kinds of cognitive delays, because they don't have, one, the requirement nor the staff to necessarily really support their needs. So I will say, again, there are some private schools that really do specialize with certain learning differences. And, a lot of public schools spend some time learning from them to replicate practices, and Pennsylvania's Center on Autism helps replicate those practices among public schools, whether they're traditional or charter. But by and large, kids with disabilities, if taking vouchers and going to a private school, are going to find, based on the data that's available, a sector that's underprepared. Now, by the way, most public schools could do a better job as well. I don't know if your listeners know that special education, which was a federal law created in the 60s, is considered the largest unfunded federal mandate on public education in the country. And Pennsylvania actually ponies up more than $1 billion to help schools meet the federal mandates, which we should all want to meet for our kids in terms of public education for kids who are disabled. But it is billions short of what's needed because so many of those children need such intensive supports. So I don't think that anybody is arguing that vouchers is going to be a panacea for children with special ed. In fact, I think it's going to be become a cauldron of litigation immediately because other states have had lots of trouble where private schools have refused to accept a voucher from a child with a disability. I also want to say that.
Go ahead, Donna. Try to wrap up soon, Donna. Your time is limited.
Go ahead. That's fine. Go ahead.
And I just want to redirect the conversation here and consider if a school voucher program goes through, in your opinion, what is the best way to channel school voucher money directly to the student, or should it go to the school?
I think that the funding should go directly to the school. I mean, that's how our charter schools are funded right now. They keep, they register all their students. That's sent over to the home district. The home district then sends the payment back over to the charter school. I think that would be beneficial. And I do think that if all schools, once they start to have different students present, then they start to add additional services, and so just because a private school doesn't have a service now doesn't mean that they wouldn't have a service later. Just like when our charter schools first started, maybe their strength wasn't in special ed, and it wasn't in many cases because they were just starting out. But now if you go that, we have charter schools that focus on autism, and we have charter schools that focus on dyslexia. Our first replication school in 5 years is dyslexia school in Pittsburgh. So I think that the longer that you're in something and the more funding that does come available to any school, you're able to add more additional services and really give more to the children.
Sorry, Donna, for cutting you off before. So same question to you. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I don't think we should have a charter program in Pennsylvania. The record in states with it is very disappointing for children who are intended for this program to be served. There's not boosts in academic achievement. And there are barriers for kids with special ed, perhaps for the reasons Ann's pointed out. They're not ready, they're not prepared. This is not like learning to fly a plane while you're flying. That's not what we can do with kids' education. Schools need to be prepared and ready, and they need to know what they're doing. And so this is not the training ground, and private schools should not be the training ground for that.
But back to the question of what's the best way to channel that money, Donna, to the student or to the school?
Well, I think what your listeners need to understand is that money doesn't fall out of the sky. So we have a $40 billion or so state budget. We make decisions about that. If we're going to put money into vouchers, that's money that is taken away from other costs that may be from public education, which would harm charters and traditional public schools. It may be money taken away from higher ed. It may be money taken away from job creation. So every dollar in the budget is a decision point. So first, I don't think we should be spending any money on charters. The going proposal is to put $100 million into a a voucher program. And the estimates of what happened in other states show that that will rapidly grow to be more than $1 billion. Do we really think we want to experiment with our children and put $1 billion on the table for this? The proposal that is on the table gives the money to the family. And when states did that, other states have done that, you've had massive fraud. So that's a relatively bad idea. Ann's point about the money going to the school makes more sense. Then they need to have a lottery so that it's fair for who gets in. So the schools can't pick who comes in because these are tax dollars. These are not personal dollars. So there's a lot of room for error, fraud, discrimination, and waste. And I recommend we invest in our public schools because the research is when we do it, we see benefits and opportunity for kids and better educational outcomes.
Now, as I pointed out a while ago, the voucher debate flared up once again in August. We expect it to return this fall. So it's worth it to consider where the major political parties stand on this issue. So, for example, where are Republicans, since they're going to be involved in this debate, on the issue of school vouchers?
The Senate Republicans are very much committed to the vouchers and to school choice. I think they're very committed to school choice, what I should say, and vouchers being one part of that program. Our House Democrats feel, different, both about they attack charters nonstop, they attack vouchers nonstop. That they want the only schools to be in Pennsylvania as traditional public schools, which have been failing for, decades now. And so, I do. We have had this situation where nothing gets fixed and children are being failed every day. I mean, children right now are being failed today in Pennsylvania in the educational system. And so this thing, okay, well, we'll fix it, and maybe we'll fix it. I mean, that's one of the reasons that our charter schools, and we've moved to these high quality standards, is we're going to fix it now. We're not going to wait. And listen, our charter schools do not get support from PDE in most cases. They don't get support from the IUs in many cases. Our charter schools are out there doing this on their own, and our coalition has stepped in to really give that guidance. So, I mean, there's all these districts who are authorizers, and yet they're not supporting the charter schools that are in their area. So, I mean, if you have a failing school, why should you be allowed to tell me what a good school looks like? So I think that we have to continue to move forward.
So, Donna, what do you think about the debate in Harrisburg? And let's add another ingredient to the stew here. I mean, Republicans, for the most part, Senate Republicans, for the most part, approve of vouchers. But there's a handful of Democrats that like them, too.
Yes, there are, including the governor. And I think one of the reasons is because we're all looking for a silver bullet. Look, we have charter schools in Philadelphia where 100% of their kids are failing the state Keystone exams. 100%, and I can rattle off the names. And we have public schools, as Ann pointed out, where the average performance across the state is 50%, not good enough. And so I think that our policymakers are actually trying to figure out what do we do about this. But there's some really clear research that shows these structural governance changes and choice have not changed the outcomes for kids. We have 26 years with charters, and if we embark on vouchers, we'll see the same where the other states have demonstrated now with at least 8 years of failure. Look, we need better trained teachers. We need better resource schools. We need mandates that reduce class size in elementary school. We need required full-day kindergarten. We need every kid to have pre-K. These are the things where the top performing states and international competitors are excelling. Ann says she's looking around the country. McKinsey did an extraordinary report years ago, and there were very few inputs. that change student outcomes. And instead of trying to create new structures and creating turf wars, if we could invest in the things that are proven to work, we can have faster results and our kids can have better opportunity. They're more complicated, but they actually result in what we know needs to happen for kids.
And just the fact that we're sitting here talking about school vouchers tells me that there's dissatisfaction out there about schools there in the public. Just how much dissatisfaction is there?
I think there's a great deal. Right now we have approximately 20 to 30,000 children on waiting lists to get into charter schools. I mean, and I think that we see the highest enrollment in our cyber schools at approximately 500 students per month. The enrollment is going up. The highest enrolling grade is 10th grade in cyber schools because students are looking for that accelerated graduation. We are not the same country or state that we were prior to the pandemic. And I think that we keep trying to make people go back to what our schools were, and it doesn't exist any longer. You know, many of our schools were remote for, almost a year. Then they came back in a hybrid, which seemed to really be beneficial to both teachers and students. And then when we asked teachers to come back 5 days a week into a classroom, which is, can be 10 hours a day when you arrive, you set up, by the time you leave. I mean, I had teachers at my building 12 hours a day. They just couldn't do it. And I don't think that the teachers have necessarily left teaching. They've just left teaching in traditional public schools or traditional even brick and mortar charter schools to some degree. So, teachers are looking for that cyber ability, that flexibility that they had during the pandemic. So whatever happened 5 years ago in research, in many ways, some of it may be relevant, but most of it's going to be very irrelevant now. We are in a whole different time, and now we have the introduction of AI coming in. And when you said about textbooks, and listen, I love a textbook. I was an ELA teacher, so I love books. But
did your textbook have a president that was 10 years out of date?
Absolutely, and there's the problem, right? We are teaching children things that are irrelevant to today, but if we use the combination of both textbooks and AI and technology doing that smart work, we'll be bringing high quality education to everyone.
All right.
I think
go ahead, Donna.
That is the revolution that we need. So there's no question that the technology that we used during COVID for young children was probably off the mark, but it was the best we could do as the country. But Ann is totally right. Our high schools could be revolutionized by the integration of virtual instruction in cutting edge ways that would give way more contextual based learning. Kids would learn real world skills. No kid would be waiting on a waiting list to get into a calculus class or get extra help with reading, whatever their needs were. If the State Department of Education and the IUs were given the charge to really find the way in which high quality, state-of-the-art virtual instruction could augment in-person instruction in our high schools. During the Rendell administration, we began that with Classrooms for the Future, and it's time. We now have so much more capacity. And again, these governance debates and these diversions about who gets money avoid the real questions of how do we make classroom instruction the best it can be, because that's what kids need. It doesn't matter where they go to school. They need great class instruction that meets their needs.
The call-in segment of Capitol Preview is going to end in about 7 minutes or so you still have time to call us or text us. I'll remind you the number 1-877-PA6-5001 to call us. To text us, it's 717-219-4001. Okay, ladies, we got a text question, and I'm going to try to read it to you. It says, I'm a school board director in Dauphin County. I'm just wondering how you help special needs kids virtually.
I have to tell you, the cyber schools are amazing. And if you've never been to one, you need to go see at least one of them. One of the things is that students actually can come in person for our cyber schools. Every one of them have brick and mortar buildings that children come to. And what we actually found during the pandemic is special ed children did a much better job actually online. Actually, their achievement went up. Why? They didn't have the distractions, right? They had someone there to assist and coach them. They had the ability to learn at their own pace. We see an acceleration in all of our special ed students, the majority across the state, which was amazing. So that really told me that a lot of times we get in children's way for learning. And that's one of the things that can happen. If an authorizer is out there and you have not visited a cyber school, you need to go today, because what is going on there and what you think is going on is completely different. And we have some amazing cyber schools in Pennsylvania.
Donna, I'm going to read part of that question for you again. It reads, I'm a school board director in Dauphin County. I'm just wondering how you help special needs kids virtually. Go ahead.
Look, I think the question isn't about cybers or traditional. A public school can use its resources to offer virtual instruction to the extent that it would be useful for a special ed student. And so it may be that a hearing impaired student or a sight impaired student might, through assistive technology and virtual support, do better than in a classroom for a part of the day. But we in America have adopted a policy of inclusion. We don't want children who are special needs children to be isolated from the mainstream of society and from creating social relationships with other children. And we want children who don't have disabilities to be engaging and be friends with children who are, so that we have a mainstream that it welcomes us all and is used to dealing with all of us. So I think, first of all, we need to be really careful about things that are going to segregate students based on disability. We want these kids to be as much as possible part of their school community. At the same time, there are tons of resources and research about the use of technology and virtual supports that can help certain kids with certain disabilities. It's not de facto going to happen in a cyber. It's not de facto going to happen for every kid in a public school. It's really an individualized. That's why special ed works on something called an IEP, Individualized Education Plan. And it means that the Dauphin County School Board member needs to look to their IU and the IUs across the state and see what's available. And it may be, although I'm not familiar with any cyber that has a plethora of options for children with special education needs. And I just need to point out for the viewers that the cybers, while they have extraordinary technology capability, do not have performance that comes along with it. Most of their student performance is below that of the urban districts that many of the state senators are wringing their hands about, saying we need to give kids vouchers to get out of, when in fact there are cyber schools performing worse than many of the urban charters and urban public schools. So again, governance and structure are really a sideshow here. We need to focus on what instructional needs are. And I think the Dauphin County School Board member's question is right on the point. When can it work and when can it? And where can I get it? And it isn't about a structure, it's about an individualized need.
Go ahead, Ann. Only a few minutes left.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to take on the cyber scores from the PSSA Keystones building scores. The majority of cyber parents actually opt out of taking the PSSAs and Keystones for lots of reasons. One, they don't want to travel and put their child at a hotel to take a test. And so that's what we're looking at. And there is technology that would allow children to actually take the PSSAs and Keystones at home, but our state won't allow them to. So the depiction of the scores that you see on our building scores for our cybers is completely not true. In fact, many of them receive high academic awards and achievement. Their children are going to the best universities, they're graduating ahead of time, and they're out there contributing to Pennsylvania.
Donna, I want to put this question to you, and if you can, make your answer, about a minute in length, because our time is limited, of course, and we've been talking a great deal about school vouchers here today, and we've also acknowledged that Governor Shapiro has a position on this issue, and I'm going to try to sum it up right here. He says he won't take a dollar away from public schools in order to fund a school voucher program, and how do you respond to that?
I think that's right. I think it's the best policy. I think when Governor Shapiro was running for his office, he said, I will not be entertaining alternative ways to structure public schools until we fully fund our public schools. Mm-hmm. The court has been very clear. This is a core responsibility of the Commonwealth. The legislature and the governor need to reach agreement to fund our schools. That's a predicate condition for creating a more robust options for parents. Until parents really have a choice, we'll be throwing good money after bad by creating a voucher program. And I think that the governor's position is the right one, not taking a dime away from public schools to support vouchers.
So, Ann, what is the governor getting at here? Possibly setting up a separate funding source for vouchers? That seems inevitable given that position.
Absolutely. The money was set aside in order to do the voucher system. I would really encourage all of our legislators to really talk about what is best for Pennsylvanians and get less polarized, less political about this, and really decide what can we do collectively for all children in Pennsylvania.
All right, our guests have been Ann Clark from the Pennsylvania Coalition of Public Charter Schools and Donna Cooper of Children First PA. Thank you both very much. PCN's John Cole talked to Representative Marla Brown about a bill that would make it a felony to falsely report a threat to a school.
How common are falsely reported threats made toward schools in Pennsylvania?
Unfortunately, it's more common than you think, and that's actually what prompted this legislation. Last year, shortly after the threat that was called in Tennessee, shortly after Easter, there was an anonymous threat that was called across the country, and actually one of them was called into a local school district of mine, Newcastle High School, and that's what, in fact, prompted me to move this legislation forward.
So what do these threats look like in Pennsylvania specifically?
Well, it could look like anything as simple as someone calling in saying that they saw a bomb laying on the floor, or that they in fact are going to be attacking someone with a knife, God forbid. It's anything of this sort. And the problem is not just the immediate threat to our children, but the thousands of hours and resources necessary to respond to something like this.
So Representative Brown, what is the current punishment for those who make these false threats toward schools?
Unfortunately, right now it's just a misdemeanor, which is why I'm proposing that we elevate it to a felony offense.
So what's the feedback been thus far since you've brought up this legislation?
I've gotten some great feedback from the public who, quite frankly, is very frustrated with the lack of response from the legislature when it comes to these types of threats being called in. I have a niece, my own niece, that is threatened and asking me, what can be done? I don't want to be afraid to go to school. And I see this as a positive step forward to begin to take action against these types of threats.
Have you talked to lawmakers either on your side of the aisle or the opposing side that have discussed certain things that they might think the law needs to be tweaked, or has the feedback been mostly positive?
It's been mostly positive. Unfortunately, the bill currently sits with the Judiciary Committee, so I'm hoping that they will bring it forth for a vote.
So you said right now, currently, again, it's in the Judiciary Committee. Is there a specific timeline in which you think this may be voted upon?
Unfortunately not. I've not been given a time frame.
Has the bill received bipartisan support yet?
We are receiving bipartisan support, which is very encouraging.
Are there other states that have implemented similar laws that you think Pennsylvania is, again, that your proposal is somewhat mirroring?
We really are not mirroring any laws. This is considered a bit extreme in the sense that a false alarm would be considered a felony, but I think it's going to take extreme measures to begin to put a stop to this outrageous behavior.
Now, if this bill were, again, moved out of the Judiciary Committee and passed by the State House at large and State Senate, how long do you think it would take for something like this to be implemented in Pennsylvania?
The biggest part is getting the vote through the House and Senate. I don't think implementing it would be very difficult at all.
And again, who would be responsible for making sure that everything is carried out in a timely manner for, again, these threats if they're made in the future and this law is passed?
It would be our local law enforcement officials who right now, at least in my district, are feet on the ground. We have local officers involved in all of our school districts. But this would just give them an additional advantage to be able to prevent situations like this moving forward.
And so last thing, Representative Brown, again, just tell our audience once more about the specific piece of legislation, the specifics of it.
So I'm proposing that any false threats that be called into schools be considered a felony.
Representative Marla Brown, Republican representing parts of Lawrence County, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, John Cole. We have a new On the Issues airing Wednesday at 6 p.m. Representative Jim Gregory joins us to discuss citizen involvement in sexual predator sting operations. That's it for Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Kasper. Thanks for watching.